today's review, I'm sharing my thoughts on a grimdark fantasy series I started as part of a ChatGPT recommendations post that I'm going to be putting together. Today I'm sharing my thoughts on Beyond Redemption by Michael Fletcher. If you're unfamiliar with this book, it is the first of a trilogy called the Manifest Delusions series, and it's a very dark, grimdark fantasy. It's an interesting premise. I really like the sound of this book. Unfortunately, the execution didn't quite work out to my high expectations that I had. But today's video is all to tell you why. Before I get into my thoughts on this book, here is a little bit of detail about it. So, as I mentioned, this is a grimdark fantasy book. It's just over 500 pages in length, and here is the synopsis. When belief defines reality, those with the strongest convictions, the crazy, the obsessive, the delusional, have the power to shape the world. And someone is just mad enough to believe that he can create a god. Violent and dark, the world is filled with Geisterkranken, men and women whose delusions manifest. Sustained by their own belief and the beliefs of those around them, they can manipulate their surroundings. For the High Priest Koenig, this means creating order out of chaos in his city-state, leading his believers to focus on one thing: helping a young man, Morgan, ascend to become a god he can control. Trouble is, there are many who would see a god in their thrall, including the priest's own doppelgangers, a slaver no one can resist, and 3 slaves, led by possibly the only sane man left. As these forces converge on the boy, there's one more obstacle. Time is running out. Because as the delusions become more powerful, they can also become harder to control. The fate of the Geisterkranken is to inevitably find oneself in the after-death. The question then is who will rule there? Now this synopsis really caught my attention. It's very dark. I really was kind of into the idea that belief defines reality, because we all know that's kind of true. If you take one look at the news nowadays, you believe what you're told, but it's not necessarily the full truth. So this belief defining reality, and there being almost like an element of magic and delusion, and a lot of people with various kind of mental disorders and that kind of thing in positions of power was a really kind of big up for me. And I do like me an immoral character, so I thought I was going to be onto a winner with this book. Fortunately not, but it had its good bits, don't get me wrong, and I'm going to start with those. So I really liked the idea and principle of this book, as I've kind of already covered. Also, somebody having the belief that they can make their own god is a really interesting kind of take on a story. So, it had a unique premise that I was really kind of keen to get behind. As I mentioned, I do like an immoral character, and this book basically doesn't have anything else. So we have characters who are looking to manipulate others, including even versions of themselves, who are out to get what they can. One of the main characters is a kleptomaniac. She's a prolific thief, including from her own friends. There is a man who believes he is the best swordsman in the world, and he's basically always willing to pick a fight to kind of prove the point and make people believe he's the strongest or best swordsman in the world by basically defeating other people. So he is always getting himself into trouble and picking fights, especially when, they're trying to be a little bit more covert. He just sabotages the whole thing. So very kind of vast array of characters, and all of them have their own agendas and motives, and none of them are good. None whatsoever. So it's a very dark book. And as I'm sure you can kind of imagine, with these very strong personalities and immoral characters, There is a lot of violence in this book. It's a very dark, gory, sometimes like a little bit unnecessarily violent book, but by all means, if that's your cup of tea, then crack on, fair dues. There are plenty of people who have really enjoyed this book. It was just a little bit much for me. The ending of this first book is also, or coming up to the ending was quite good because there are a lot of twists. So just as you think you were kind of guessing where things were going to go, actually you kind of found the rug pulled out from under you and you had to reassess, like, oh, okay. It was very fast paced towards the end. And so as a lot of these kind of plans and machinations and whatever come to fruition, a lot of things start happening very quickly, and I really liked that kind of pacing. I broadly found the book a little bit slow paced, but the ending, it picked up for me, so that kind of really worked for me, and I loved the nature of story changing a lot in a very short space of time. Another aspect I really enjoyed kind of about the narrative style of this book is that chapters are written from different characters. And over the course of the book, characters are split out across different locations on the map. So we get a broader picture of what's going on by seeing these different separate characters as, so people move across the map. Characters over here end up over here with another group of people. So that chopping and changing made it more interesting for me. I think if I'd ended up stuck with one character perspective, I would have been bored. But broadly speaking, I generally prefer books with multi-perspectives anyway, so that kind of leans into my natural preference line. Finally, the thing I enjoyed about the book, and you've probably guessed from the synopsis, is that there's quite a lot of German influence to a lot of the names and what's going on in this book, which isn't something I see very often. As kind of Western influences go, German isn't kind of very high up there. But it was nice to see. Some of the names are very, very difficult to read though, and obviously I had to try and pronounce one of those in the synopsis. I apologise, I've butchered that completely. But there are also some very long place names, and I'll spell them out on screen for you because I'm not trying to say them. So yeah, German was different. Obviously you could kind of read a little bit differently into German and kind of the very negative, violent, unpleasant side of the story to being associated with German when it's not normally, but I hope that wasn't an underlying motive. But it was nice for me to see, and it's nice to kind of get, perspective broadened a little, and it was obviously a little bit different. So those are the things that worked for me with Beyond Redemption. But there were some things that didn't work quite so well. So as I've mentioned, I found the pacing of this book to be a little bit slow. Now, if you are kind of following my Sunday summary, kind of regular reading updates, I started this book in about mid-December, and it took me about a month to read it. And now, if you know me, that's not my reading pace at all. 500 pages should probably polish off within a couple of weeks, maybe 3 at a push, but I was much nearer kind of 4 or 5 with this book. And it's because of the pacing for me. I wasn't drawn to pick up the book as strongly as I was others, because I just felt like things were taking a long time to get to where they were going to go. And yeah, it just didn't quite have the hooks in me that I hoped it would. But there we go, these things happen. One of the downsides of having a book filled with immoral characters is that we kind of had nobody to root for. You didn't really build up any kind of strong feelings or any love for a single one of the characters in this book. So that made it very hard. I think if there was any character you could have tried to get behind, it was Morgan, the child they were trying to make into a god, because he has obviously grown up very innocent of what type of people there are around him and the people who are trying to manipulate him. But even he does some things that are immoral himself towards the end of the book. So you kind of end it thinking that there's nobody you had any strong feelings for, and yeah, it's just hard to invest in characters you don't like. As much as I said I really enjoyed kind of the twists and the build up towards the final climax, I actually thought the very ending of the book was a little bit anticlimactic. It didn't quite live up to where I thought it was going to go, and now that we've kind of got to where we are, and yes, there are 2 more books in the series, I don't actually know where the book is going to go next. So I feel like I felt a little bit lost finishing this, because the things that happened, and then I was like, oh. Like, I just had no strong feelings for continuing, but also, like, I have no kind of idea on direction of where things could go next, whether that's something that I'm going to be interested in reading or not. So I kind of just finished the book on a bit of a meh, if I could just describe it in any other way. I appreciate that's not very descriptive, but that's just how I left finishing the book. So that's why it ended up with a 3-star rating from me, because there were aspects of the book I enjoyed. But also because I feel the way I feel, I have already said I'm not going to be continuing with the rest of the series. By all means, if there are people who absolutely love this series, and there are plenty out there, then there are going to be some very different perspectives and reviews. So if you're still considering picking up this book, please go and check out those other thoughts. This is obviously my perspective of the book, and I hope I've given you a bit of a more kind of rounded thing, where, yes, overall, not a great, we're just in a middle of the road review. But there were some good things. There were some things I didn't like so much. But obviously it ultimately comes down to your reading tastes. So those are my thoughts on Beyond Redemption by Michael Fletcher. Have you read this book or any other books in the series? Do you like grimdark fantasy, or is this something you would like to try and read more of in future? Until next time, bye for now.